NFL Week 7 is almost here, and that means it is time to consider your starts and sits for your rosters. We've got a couple of bye weeks this weekend. We have got the Bills and we have the Ravens out, so you need to sit your Bills players. Obviously, mentioned, and do you know what? Ravens players we've been considering sitting for the last couple
I
of
was
weeks.
about to say, the Ravens have had a few weeks of bye. This is about their third bye on the trot, isn't it?
Thank you for that. I really appreciate your kind words. So, starts of the week, then, got a few options to consider here. As always, there are the obvious players that you start in, week out. We're looking for some of those options where they're not quite so highly started. Currently, Caleb Williams, I've got versus New Orleans Saints. We're given the fourth most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. And Williams is currently QB8 in fantasy points per game. And still only 33% leagues. And only started, get my words out, 30% of leagues and available in 26. So Caleb Williams could well be an option for you this week.
Yeah, indeed. I think he took a little while to get going this year, didn't he, Caleb Williams? A lot of talk of him pre-season. Big year for him. Obviously linked up well with the Dunze. I think it's, anyone who plays the Saints this year is going to put up big numbers. So you'd be absolutely crazy not to start him this week.
Continuing a theme with starts of the week, and that is looking at which running backs have the Cincinnati Bengals. And this week it's the Steelers. So Jaylen Warren is an interesting option. So Bengals are giving up the most fantasy points per game to running backs, 32.12. Warren is I put clear lead back, not in the same way that other teams have clear lead backs, but based on workload, he's the number one option for the Pittsburgh at the minute. And his only game below 13 points was last week against a tough Browns defense as well. So would you be plugging in Warren against your Bengals this week, Edward?
100%. I mean, he's no Josh Jacobs, of course, and Jacobs obviously had a field day last week against the Bengals. And you're right, he did really well against the Browns, who are like in a different stratosphere to the Bengals when it comes to defense. So he should have a very fruitful outing on Thursday Night Football against the Bengals. I'm sorry to say.
My next pick isn't one I'm overly happy with naming, but Ramondre Stevenson against Tennessee. So it feels risky at all points, but the Titans are conceding just under 28 fantasy points per game to running backs. So Stevenson or Henderson. Maybe. I don't know. I think Stevenson would be my safer option of the two. Should have flex value at least this week. Henderson still waiting for that Henderson breakout week. Cortland Sutton, he had a lovely little rest in London last week, not having a great deal to do against the Jets. He's got the Giants this week, so he moves the other side of New York. Not a good last week, as we said, but the Giants defense have given up 38.6 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So Cortland Sutton should have value. Once again, I think it's worth plugging in at your flex spot. Mason Taylor, we said last week to go and get him where available.
You said last week.
I said last week he was a player I was looking at, definitely, but he was one that I thought was really worth getting on your roster for this week's matchup, especially because you got the Panthers, you got the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends. And with the added factor of Wilson being out, if Justin Fields has remembered how to pass on the flight back to America, I think Taylor is likely to see probably 10 targets. That seems probable. It just depends if those targets are in his immediate area and are catchable and more than 2 yards away. But Mason Taylor, I think, against Carolina should get the job done and have tight end 8 to 12 sort of value for you. And then I've got another tight end for our consideration. Darren Waller against Cleveland. Currently only started in 55% of leagues. And with Miami this week, that should be higher as they're giving up the fifth most fantasy points per game to tight ends, 23.2, including over the last 4 weeks, 21.20 points against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that was against numerous tight ends. I think it was all three tight ends got involved in Pittsburgh. I don't think it's the same sort of job share in Miami. So, yeah, Darren Waller could be an interesting pickup again. Before we move on to have a look at some sits, though, please do take a moment to subscribe, like, and give us a share. We've got our streaming options show coming up for you. And we also have our DFS show on Saturday. And then weekly, our starts and our sits. I'm going to stick well on brand. I love saying to sit Sam Darnold. This week, though, this isn't just my bias. This is pure data and data alone, because he has the Texans, who are conceding a miserly 9.39 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, the lowest in the league. So don't expect Darnold to go back to back to back with top 12 weeks. He's had 2 solid weeks. I'd imagine this week will be a down week. Cardinals running backs in general. So I've got Bam Knight on the screen, but I don't know. Do we know who's actually the lead back? Is it Knight? Is it Carter? Is it DeMarcado? We thought last week it was going to be Carter again. Bam Knight came in. Is this the week that DeMarcado does step in? This isn't a week I want to take that gamble, because the Packers defense is solid, the 3rd best against running backs. So for me, bench them all.
Yeah, we spoke about it in the review show, didn't we? And I said, I think you can probably count DeMarcado out. It does look like it's a job share between Bam Knight and Carter going forward, but who knows? And I agree. I think either way, this week against the Packers would not be a week to be plugging them in unless you're in desperate need.
Next up, Jake Tong. So Kittle may be back, albeit in a reduced capacity, coming back from the hamstring injury. And we don't know if he will actually be playing. He's meant to be practicing this week. I've not heard anything positive to that degree yet, but we shall see. The reason really for benching Tongs, and if Kittle is back, benching him as well on his return, because the Falcons given up the fewest points to tight ends. That has been consistent week after week after week. And they've also only given up 9 receptions to tight ends in 6 games. So don't risk Kittle and don't go chasing Tong's recent high point tallies. Next up, Wan'Dale Robinson versus the Broncos. Denver only given up 24.72 fantasy points per game to wide receivers, 2nd fewest in the league. So once again, don't go chasing previous good weeks where the matchup would indicate that's not going to repeat. So week 6, he was wide receiver 9. I also predict a little bit of a humbling performance, I think, for Dart and Co on offense this week. But I said that last week against the Eagles, and look what happened.
It's that M word, isn't it, Mark? Momentum. The Giants have certainly got it at the moment, and everything you said, it was correct in terms of the data and what would happen to the Giants over the last couple of weeks, but it hasn't happened yet. So that's the only thing that would stop me from benching Robinson, because they do seem to be full of confidence at the moment of the Giants' offense.
I think I would just like to think that if you had Wan'Dale Robinson on your roster, you've also got a couple of wide receivers you feel a little bit more confident in, or on a par with, just in friendlier matchups. So, as we say every week, you may have no choice but to start some of these players, but I would at least be thinking, I think, on Robinson. Next up, Travis Etienne versus the LA Rams, currently starting 78% of leagues, and that needs to drop this week for the inconsistent Etienne. Rams giving it the 3rd fewest points to running backs. And finally, Tony Pollard versus the Patriots. He's averaging 10.5 fantasy points per game, not what we were hoping from him this season. And the Patriots been solid against the run, 7th best in the league, with only 1 running back surpassing 13 points against them. Pollard will not be the 2nd. Shall we move on, though, Ed, to our absolute most favourite part of the week, second only to zeros? It's time to get competitive.
Fantasy Props, Heston versus Ed.
So, fantasy props last week, we were looking at the point-scoring bonanza that was the Broncos versus the Jets. And as you can see, Ed managed to come out of this favorably.
I didn't win.
On the board. So we basically chose. Well, you pitched to me, Ed, didn't you? Explain what the prop was.
Well, we just chose a position at. We chose a team from each position. You got the first choice at quarterback, wide receiver, and defense. I got the first choice at running back and tight end, and whichever was the highest scoring player at each position is who qualified. And so, highest scoring is a very loose term for all of these players. There were very few high scores, but you chose Justin Fields, who was awful. I chose the running backs of the Jets, and I think that was very close, wasn't it?
Yeah, 6.5 points for RJ Harvey, 5.9 for Brees Hall.
Yes, Brees Hall did
Sums it
not
up.
have a good day. Then you chose wide receivers, but I think the Jets wide receivers just edged it. Who was it? Was it Garrett
So
Wilson who edged it?
it wasn't. It was Josh Reynolds.
Right,
That's the
there we
state
go.
of this game. And
Yeah,
Pat Bryant was
Garrett
the top
Wilson
scorer
was
for the
in a
Broncos
very
as well.
moody mood the whole time. And then I chose Evan Engram. The Broncos tight ends, but was it Engram that got me the point?
Of course it wasn't. That's not how the game went at all. Everything was
It wasn't.
unexpected.
Oh, it was
Nate
what's his name who got
Atkins.
the only
Yeah,
touchdown, wasn't it?
yeah,
God,
exactly. What's his name?
how could I forget the only touchdown in the game?
And Mason Taylor did very little for me either. And then, I mean, it was a game for the defenses, wasn't it? And you managed to edge that with the Broncos getting 13 points to the Jets get 11. I mean, should we just move on because it was a
It was a horrible
disappointing
game.
points.
I got a
discussion,
point.
wasn't it?
That's all I'm pleased about.
So our prop this week, then, we have gone for AFC versus NFC. Basically, we had free choice for quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, and a tight end from the division of our choosing. And because I am pitching the prop to you, Ed, you got first choice and you went for NFC. I knew that obviously I was going to be without the Ravens and the Bills from this. But when I started to then look at the top 20 NFC players, all of the players are projecting to have a big week. The NFC was looking quite strong. So you rightly chose the NFC. Do you want to talk us through your team?
Yeah, I did debate with the AFC, especially from a quarterback perspective, because you've gone for the quarterback that I 100% would have gone for. But yeah, the NFC edged it for me. So quarterback, I've gone for Dak. It seems a no-brainer. He's QB3 overall, and 4 out of 6 weeks he's been QB1 weeks for him. 13 passing touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. The Commanders this week, and they're despite preseason optimism, they're a bottom 10 defense, a bottom 10 pass defense. So I expect Dak to have a good week. Now, Bijan, now mega weeks either side of the bye. Looks like he's finding his groove behind Penix. Heavily involved in the receiving game. He just seems to have such a safe floor as Bijan. So again, that was a fairly easy-ish decision. Wide receiver, I debated this. You made the point in the starts and sits about who the Seahawks are playing, and it's going to be challenging this week for the Seahawks. I can't risk Puka, who might have been my first choice, but I might have gone for JSN anyway. 5 out of 6 weeks have been wide receiver 1 weeks, and he's just been pretty relentless. He is Sam Darnold's top target, and he just seems to have a pretty safe floor. And then tight end, again, this was pretty much a no-brainer. Dallas Goedert at the Eagles, tight end 4, despite missing a week. He's averaged 10 targets in the last 2 games, touchdown a week for the last 4 weeks. Bit of a risk selecting him against the Vikings, who are the second best defense against the pass. They've only conceded 5 passing touchdowns, so it is a bit of a risk. But I think that's a fairly strong team.
Yeah, agreed. And I found it tricky trying to work out who was going to be against them. So I've gone for Mahomes at quarterback. It's a tricky slate for AFC QBs. So Mahomes was the only choice. I didn't really debate anyone else. I'll be honest, I expect Dak, Daniels, Goff, and Mayfield to all beat him this week. So I'm looking for a down week for Dak and a continued run of form for Mahomes. Next up, I went for Jonathan Taylor, the obvious and only choice as well, really, there. So the Chargers got progressively worse to running backs as the last 6 weeks have rolled on. And Achane comes to put up 31 points last week. So I expect more of the same from Taylor. That is going to be just a who has the biggest week, I think, between Bijan and Taylor. I don't see a down week for either of them. Jamar Chase, once again, the only real choice, despite him having Pittsburgh. Well, I'm hoping for a JSN down week because we cannot be confident in anything coming out of Cincinnati at the moment. I'm just hoping Chase does the business and JSN chills out a little bit. That'll be quite helpful for me. The one pick I do feel reasonably confident on, to be fair, is Darren Waller. So the same reason as the start of the week. Got it is better, but the lineup makes it more optimistic when you look at those matchups. But this isn't like last week. It isn't where we're putting QB against QB, running back against running back. It is the combined total of the 4 positions. So one big week from one of those players could win it for us, or one toilet week could ruin it for us. So we shall see. Hopefully, I'll go 5-1, and then we'll just continue rolling. You're in the game. You've had your 1 win, Ed. Surely that is enough.
I'm happy to get a point on the board, I'll be honest.
Next up, then, we're going to move on to Sunday Night Bet Club after, of course, you've taken a little moment to pause and subscribe to us. Last week, I did an optimistic bet about all the things I would like to see in the London game.
Sorry. No, I don't think any of them happened, did they?
No, what I should have done is predicted the worst possible outcome and then still hit the under on each of them. So before we look at our game of the week and Thursday night football, Ed, do you want to explain what your more probable bet is for the week?
Yeah, week 1, we had a success with our red zone accumulator. So we've gone back to that for week 7. There are only 6 games in the early slate, and I've pretty much gone for the favourites on all of them. Saints at the Bears. Bears had a great win on Monday Night Football, and I think they should be too much for the Saints at home. Dolphins Browns was a tough one, and I think this is the only one where I've not gone for the favourites. I just think the Dolphins have a little bit more about them on offense, and the Browns with Gabriel, I'm not convinced of the points they can put on the board, so I've gone for the Dolphins. Raiders at the Chiefs. I know the Chiefs have been up and down, but goodness me, they should beat the Raiders. Eagles at the Vikings. Again, that's quite a tough one to call. I just think the Eagles need that win, and they're better across the board than the Vikings, with a better offense. So I've gone for the Eagles. Panthers at the Jets. I just think the Jets were so bad in London. I mean, you could argue they couldn't get any worse. And the Panthers are hardly any great shakes, but they at least got something about them. So I've gone Panthers. And Patriots at the Titans. Titans under their temporary coach. But the Patriots looking very good at the moment, so that was quite an easy decision. So we're going for most of the favourites. We've got odds of just about 13.0, 12-1 or plus 1,200. So if you have a bet of £10, it will give you £130, or a bet of $10 will return you
$130.
Good maths.
Right then, let's look ahead again to the week's games then. And you've chosen a potential humdinger for the game of the week, haven't you?
Indeed. Colts at the Chargers, part of that late slate on Sunday. And the picture there is from the game that secured the Chargers a playoff spot back in 2022. And yeah, the 5-1 Colts travel to LA. Very interesting matchup against the 4-2 Chargers. Both come off the back of, contrasting-ish wins. The Colts mounted that fourth quarter comeback to sneak past the Cardinals, whereas the Chargers somehow found a way past the stubborn resistance of the Dolphins. I mean, both teams looking good for the playoffs. I mean, you could argue the Chargers have got a much tougher division, so they may need to rely on a wild card, but I would not be surprised to see either of them in the postseason. Let's start off with our locked-in players, first of all. For the Colts, obviously JT, we've spoken about him already. Very high floor and a very high ceiling as well. I think Danny Dimes is probably still a lock-in for me. He's had a couple of quieter weeks, but he was back in QB1 territory against the Cardinals. And although the Chargers are a much sterner test, I still fancy him. And he's still only started in 42% of the leagues, which seems quite low. Tyler Warren is also in this category now for me, and I didn't think we'd be saying that. The rookie's tight end 2 overall, and he's averaging 6-7 targets a game. Add into the mix that he's found a taste for the end zone over the last couple of weeks, and he should guarantee you decent points. For the Chargers, now after a mega week 1 against the Chiefs, Herbert's been consistently mediocre from a fantasy perspective, ranging from QB 12 to QB 21. But he's a QB 8 overall, and he should be starting against what's a generous Colts defense. Now, is Kamani Vidal a must start? I mean, he is the backfield at the moment, and he's going to be guaranteed a lot of work in the Harbaugh offense. So would you be starting him, Kamani Vidal, if you had him in your squad?
I think my question mark is more against the Chargers O-line at the minute, and that's what doesn't fill me with the confidence. But I don't know. I think he's probably more a player I'd gamble on in DFS than be wanting to start in redraft or dynasty, I think, for me. But it's the exact sort of situation that could leave you with egg on your face. It looks like an obvious route to a decent fantasy week, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I did debate dropping him into the could pay off. Colts, if we look at in that category, I mean, of the top three receivers, Pittman's your safest bet. But again, the Chargers defense are strong against the pass. He only had 3 targets against the Cardinals, but that does seem to be a bit of an outlier. So I'd probably start him. Josh Downs, more of a risk, despite being more targeted last week. The Chargers, I'd put all the Chargers receivers in this category. I mean, obviously, McConkey had a much better couple of weeks, averaging 8 targets a game. We're not 100% sure if Quentin Johnston will be back this week, but if he does he slot back in as wide receiver 1? Keenan Allen's gone off the boil after a big first 3 weeks. He's struggled to break that 10-point barrier since then, and he looks very benchable all of a sudden, whereas he looked borderline must start after the first 3 weeks. And best of luck, Colts, Alec Pierce, too much of a gamble for me, but you might not have any choice if injuries and buys are biting. And if you're relying on Adonai Mitchell, then I'm very sorry. The Chargers, Hassan Haskins, he's an afterthought at running back, as is Trey Harris at wide receiver. The tight ends in LA are a bit of a conundrum, and maybe would have expected more from them. If you're selecting one, then it's going to be Aronde Granson, who did have a decent stat line last week, 7 of 8, 68 yards against the Dolphins. So maybe he's one worth taking a punt on this week if you're in need at tight end.
Yeah, I think the Chargers are just, you know there's going to be points somewhere, but you can't quite work out who it is it's going to get at any given week. And yeah, this is a game that is really interesting when you think we're 7 weeks in, how different games feel now to when we'd be looking at this at the start of the season. This would have been, well, Chargers going to wipe the floor with the Colts, whereas actually the Chargers are in danger of getting put in their place, aren't they, this week?
Yeah, I think the Colts probably are the favourites. And I mean, I know that they were hardly spectacular last week, but they're getting the job done and have been very impressive so far.
Speaking of hardly spectacular, that takes us into Thursday Night Football, and it is the Steelers versus the Bengals. This will be the 112th matchup between the two, and the Steelers lead the series 71-40. Feeling optimistic, Ed?
Nope.
There we go. That is the level of honest analytical detail you come to us for. The AFC North has gone very quickly from being a scary division to be in from a point of view of so many just absolute NFL behemoths on every single roster to being quite scary how much all the tides have turned for all these teams, and the Steelers now look to be in the driving seat.
It pains me to say it. Yeah, I think the Steelers look pretty much nailed on to win the division, don't they? I think the only team that can test them will be the Ravens, but yeah, the Bengals and the Browns certainly won't.
I'm going to put money on now that the final game of the season, which is Steelers-Ravens, will be crucial for the AFC North.
That'll be good.
And it'll be one where the Steelers are in the driving seat and the Ravens need to get the win to overturn that. That's what I'm going for.
Yeah, that's a good storyline. I like it.
Locked in for the Bengals, Jamar Chase. That's it, obviously. I won't go into any more detail there. Steelers, DK Metcalf is locked in on a weekly basis. And this week, Jaylen Warren joins him for the reasons stated in starts. These could pay off. So for Bengals, Higgins and Brown should be fair flex plays again. I think because they are not doing the business, they feel like they should be in the sit conversation, but they're just not. Higgins is constantly getting you reasonable wide receiver 3 numbers. No, it's not what you drafted him for, but chances are he's doing a reasonable enough job to get you into flex spot, depending on what else you've got on your bench. And Chase is an RB2. It just isn't what we're expecting, but still, you're not benching Chase because he's going to get you a steady floor and could hopefully one day this season get you a decent score again. For the Steelers, Jonnu Smith is a consideration for me in this game. And if you're in a tough spot at tight end, he could be one to go and get. If he's good price in DFS, he could be worth a play as well. He's not been highly targeted. I see him maybe getting 5-ish this game against the Bengals. And as they're giving up the most fantasy points per game to tight ends, an average of 6 receptions per game as well, I think Johnny Smith could be worth a punt this week. Aaron Rodgers could also be a good option, but I'd hope you have someone you feel safer with. He is widely available, so if you're without Josh Allen or you're struggling with quarterback rotation at the minute because of injuries, he could be one to consider. Kenneth Gainwell, I think, needs a mention for all the same reasons why Jaylen Warren is a start of the week for me. I think, once again, if you're in a tough spot, it could be worth plugging in. I think probably is more of a DFS option for me as well, taking a risk if he's at a decent price. And then our best of luck is everybody else, as always, but special mention to Joe Flacco. He was right. I've said that he was worth the pickup as a value pick in DFS last week. It paid off in DFS, but I'm not chasing 18 points last week. If you are starting him in redraft, you have our sincerest condolences.
Indeed.
That is our week 7 preview then, Ed. How are you feeling from a fantasy football point of view in general? Are you starting to prioritize your leagues you're focusing? We do too many leagues. We know this. So at the point where you can start to whittle down the ones that you definitely need to prioritize.
Yeah, I think so. There's a few. There aren't many where I've kind of sacked them off. Even I'm not doing brilliantly in our main league, our main money league, but I still feel like there's a route to me doing well. So, but yeah, I think it's a couple of weeks before I start sacking off leagues completely.
And remember, even if you are in that situation, don't give up entirely. Keep setting your rosters, make it competitive for everybody else. Just in your mind, you can kind of cross it off and get your hopes up. And then they're the ones you check in on after a couple of weeks and go, oh, I'm back in contention now. Maybe I should start paying more attention. That is all from us then. We'll be back in a couple of days with your streaming options and then on Saturday for your DFS Red Hot picks. But that's all from me. Anything further, Ed?
No, I'll just call the cab. Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.